cow looking like it was using tall wooden legs that appeared from time to time to say, like, yeah, I know you can do it. You have my trust. When I was little, I had a tree outside my bedroom window, and the moonlight spread its shadow across my ceiling. And sometimes when I woke up in my groggy state, it looked like spider webs. Everything's gonna be okay. Probably. It's hard to tell. But that doesn't mean that you should stop dreaming. The feeling I get from this is waking up in the middle of the night from a nightmare that you thought was real but really isn't. Those dreams are weird. You pick up your phone and no one is there. And for a while I was really scared of them. Like, it's definitely something that doesn't happen every day. But once I knew what was going on and why it was happening, it made a lot more sense and I became okay with it.
How's that? Does that sound good? Okay, cool.
All right. I want some water. I'm going to want some water. Good to go. Good to go.
I am good to go.
Yeah, it's the wire. Just right.
Alright.
Take a look.
Okay.
do so. Yes, indeed. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first ever public podcast stream. We've got a handful of viewers, which is nice. Tell your friends. I put it on Facebook and Twitter. And we're going to be talking about my top 100 games.
Yes.
So let's start the podcast popper, I guess, for the recording.
Do we need the ritual silence?
I snuck in the ritual silence while you're getting some water.
How sneaky of you.
Yes. I didn't want to cause people to suffer with the ritual silence while we're live. Let us start for reals. Welcome, everybody, to a special podcast episode series. We did one like this last year, and we're going to do it again. My top 100 board games of all time. Of course, I am Mark. Here with me today is Ryan.
Hello, Internet.
And our usual other people are busy today. They'll be here for the later episodes. We're going to be talking about 20 different games today, the top 100 through 81 games. If you listened to this last year, you'll know that I did my top 50, but this year I have expanded it to the top 100.
Yes, Mark has played more games and is probably even more excited about board gaming than he was a year ago, and has more games to review or to talk about.
Indeed.
So we will try to get through 20 in one episode instead of 10, which will be a little ambitious for us, but I think we can do it.
I think with just the two of us, it's not going to be too bad. Once we get Ben and Matt and Amber and other people in here,
we'll see.
We're going to have to work at it.
We'll see.
Well, because the ones last year were some of our longest episodes ever. I think the top 10 through 1 episode was nearly 2 hours long, and we try to keep this podcast under 90 minutes. So it's ambitious, but I think we can do it. I believe in us.
It's a new year. It's a new challenge.
Exactly.
In podcasting.
Are you just referencing the song Feeling Good?
No.
Okay, never mind. Ignore me. So let's talk a little bit before I get to my 100th favorite game of all time and talk about my methodology here, because there are a variety of ways you can do this. What I did was I took all my game ratings, which I record on BGG in a separate spreadsheet. Well, it's a bit complicated because our game spreadsheet has only the games that we as a game group own, and then I just rate everything else also in BGG. So I kind of combined everything in a spreadsheet, and then within each rating group, so like all the games I rated 7, and all the games I rated 7.5, and all the games I rated 8, I went to, I believe it's the website called Pub Meeple, and they have a board game ratings app, basically. Not an app like for your phone, but a system, and you throw a list of games in there, and then it will give you head-to-head matchups, and you keep selecting your favorite game out of each head-to-head, and it'll generate a list for you. Okay. So within each rating, I did that. I didn't second-guess myself, and I just went with whatever I selected at the time. I'm sure if I went in today and did the same thing, the list would come out a bit different, but generally it would be the same, and I'm satisfied with it. With these top 100 things, you can't get too bogged down in making the perfect list because it's just going to change, next week, basically. But generally, it's going to be the same over time. Although I think, looking back at the list from a year ago, and I'll talk about some of this when I get to the specific games, my opinions on some games have changed quite a bit. I mean, not a whole lot. I'm fairly stable, but quite a bit over time.
From what you said, you've obviously added 50 new games to the official rankings. And I think you said all the games from last year, only like 3 or 4 of them had moved up. The rest either stayed the same or moved down. To expand a larger list, but...
Correct. Yeah, so I don't know how I would adjust for like new games that I hadn't played before, but most... I don't know. It's like an accordion effect, right?
Yeah.
Like you have the 50, then you just add a bunch of new ones and everything kind of expands out on either end.
Right. But what that says is that you haven't changed games from last year upwards too much.
No. Honestly, we played some really awesome games in the last year, so
Yeah.
yeah, I think there'll be some surprises towards the top of the list. The reason I'm doing 100 instead of 50 is that I want these lists to be all games that I absolutely recommend. Now, when you compare it to like the guys at the Dice Tower and their top 100 list where they played thousands of games, their top 100 is like the best of the best of the best. It's like they're 9.5, 10 out of 10 games. Mine are all good games. So the games we're going to be talking about today, I don't think are mind-blowing necessarily, but I would definitely recommend them and think they're really good games.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I have glanced at the list, but I have not read all the way through it, so I'm sure I will be surprised along with many of you.
Absolutely. I think there'll be some surprises. Hope you didn't look too closely because, I don't know, I'm excited to see how it'll look. I also created some random statistics because that's what I do. But let's start, without any further ado, at number 100. And it's a game I've got right here with me, and that is Seikatsu, which is a fun little game we got a few months ago from IDW. It is a tile-laying game, really beautiful, with little plastic tiles that feel great in your hand, but dirt simple. You have this board, and it's ideally a 3-player game because you sit at 3 different perspectives around like a hexagonal board. And you're playing these little tiles that have a picture of a bird and a flower on them. And basically, when you play a tile, you score a point for all the birds of the same type surrounding the bird you just played. And then at the end of the game, you score points based on row or columns of tiles on your perspective of the board. So everyone's scoring different columns, if that makes sense, for the end game points with the flowers. And it's just a clever little system. It's casual. There's everyone's going to get a decent score, so the play's really on the margin. It's got a kind of a Carcassonne thing where you're only considering, in this game, 2 tiles at a time. So casual, some randomness involved, but beautiful to look at and a highly enjoyable game.
This is a game that I have still not played.
Really?
And I still have not played it.
I think you mentioned that like 2 months ago on the podcast, and then I told you I was going to play with you, and then I didn't.
Yeah, we have... I don't know if we pulled it out since then, actually, but... yeah, it's still a game that I want to play and looks great, but... Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. We'll have to play it immediately after this podcast. It's only like 10 minutes long, so,
Okay.
So I don't forget again. This is also, I believe, my mom's favorite game. I played it with her when she came to visit a little while ago, and she loved it. And then I got it for her for Christmas. So, shout out to my mom. All right, that's number 100. Look how fast we got through that one.
Bam. 1%
it helps,
of the way.
It helps that you haven't played it.
Yeah, I had nothing to say on that game.
I promise you have played the next game. Number 99 is Sekigahara. Right there from GMT. A block war game. A fairly simple one, honestly, about some part of Japanese history that I'm not familiar with. And it's a 2-player game, and the cool thing about block war games is that they have an inherent fog of war effect, because you can stack the blocks facing your direction, and you can see the specifics of the troops on those blocks, but your opponent can't. So this game utilizes that to great effect, and utilizes a hidden card system, which is really interesting, where you can only activate units that match the type of cards in your hand. So there's a lot of bluffing going around where you're, maybe moving over stacks of units in preparation for an attack, but you hope your opponent doesn't attack you because you don't have the cards for that attack yet, and you would be defenseless even against a smaller force. So I think it's clever. I would rate it higher than this, honestly, if it didn't feel a little bit samey each time due to the map. So given the way the game sets up with starting positions in the map and certain like geographical objectives, the general thrust of the game seems fairly similar from game to game with just the specifics varying. But I find it really, really fun.
Yeah, this is one that kind of came to mind recently of I was kind of thinking we should play that again because it's been a while and want to give it another shot.
Yeah, definitely on the list of games that I would certainly not mind playing again. But that is a long
the
list.
ever-growing list of games to play.
Yeah, list that as we play games only gets longer, which doesn't seem right, but that's how it goes.
I guess that means we're playing good games.
That's true. That's the sunny side, or the silver lining. I guess that's the term I wanted to use.
Something like that.
Something like that. Number 98 I do not own, but I have played it a couple of times, and that is a surprisingly to me hot game of the last couple of years, Terraforming Mars. Now, I enjoy the game. I think it's a good time. But when I checked, it's sitting at number 5 on the BGG list, which kind of surprises me. Like I said, I think this is a fun game. I don't think it's a bad game by any means, but it's not in my top 10. But it is a really fun game. Have you played this one yet?
No, this is another game that I want to play.
Another game you haven't played.
I wanted to play it at one of the last conventions we went to, but I was doing something else when you played, and then we never got back to it.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a tableau builder, a little bit of area control on the Mars thing. There's a way in which you can speed up or slow down the end of the game, which is something I always really like, because the game ends once Mars hits a certain threshold on 3 like terraforming metrics. So like the temperature and the number of oceans, I believe, and the oxygen level in the atmosphere. So that signals the end of the game, but you're just trying to help the best. And it's got all the cool stuff you would want in kind of a tableau builder, where there are different strategies, you have different starting positions. I've only played with the unanimously suggested variant where you draft cards for your hand, which seems to work really well. I've never played with the real way where you just get them randomly, but the drafting's fun.
Are there unique factions, or is it just you choose a strategy and that's what differentiates you?
There are unique starting factions that'll give you little bonuses. They're not super significant, but they're a decent perk at the beginning. Like okay. I know one of them starts with just tons of money, and one will be really good at metals, and another one will be really good at, I don't remember the other aspects of the other resources you're dealing with, but it's the kind of thing where it's a Euro. You're turning certain resources into other resources to turn those into points.
Pushing cubes around.
Yes, pushing really disappointingly light metallic looking cubes. They look like metal, but then they're like really light plastic. It's sad, but they are shiny. I wish the player board for this game wasn't like a thick piece of paper instead of like an actual cardboard player board. But I think the science aspect of it, and I don't know science that well, but I think they keep it fairly realistic of like possible ways we could actually terraform Mars, which is cool. So you really feel like you're doing things that could happen in the real world, in the decades to come.
Right, planting trees to generate oxygen and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I will say it went quite a bit long when I played a 5-player game, so maybe better at like 3 players, but enjoyable for sure. Number 97 is a Reiner Knizia game that I thought was older than it is. There was an original game, and now this is the card game variant or version of the game, and that is Medici the Card Game, which I believe I played right before Terraforming Mars at this one convention, so maybe they're stuck next to each other in my mind. And we played at the full 6-player count, and it was a blast. It is a little set collection card game where you're just trying to collect essentially sets of different colors of cards, more than other people. who you're competing against. So it's all about relative set size. And the way you do that is with a little simple push your luck mechanism where you get shown a card from the top of the deck and you can continue to look at cards, but if you take cards, you have to take the card that was just shown and all the previous cards.
So is it like a gin rummy thing where you're trying to play out your whole hand?
Well, no, you only get a certain number of total cards each turn. So you're trying to maximize the value of each of those cards.
Okay, so having a bunch of singletons is not what you want.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or like, well, it's not only just the number of cards, they each have a different point value, and there's a couple other things you're competing over. But I like how it combines just kind of a simple way of measuring progress with the push your luck thing. And at the fullest player count, we were like taunting people and being like, draw another one, and that was a great time. I enjoyed it quite a bit. So that's Medici the card game. Number 96 is a game that I may never play again. Oh, I got it right here. Though I do enjoy it quite a bit. And that is Descent 2nd Edition, Journeys in the Dark. We had a blast with this game. We
have so much lore and like inside jokes and collective stories from this game, which in some ways I think that ought to bump it up the list a little bit.
Yeah.
I understand why it's rated lower than some of the other games, because we've found better versions of this genre of game, if you will.
Right.
But just for the experience factor, I think this maybe deserves like an extra half point.
It probably got an extra half point for me, at least from that.
Okay.
So here's the thing, though. I say I may never play this game again because it's a dungeon crawler game, and there are definitely going to be more dungeon crawl games higher on this list, and I prefer those. And the thing is, like, obviously there are multiple like Euro games I'd be willing to play on this list, but a dungeon crawl with a campaign like this one and the other ones higher on the list require a certain amount of commitment. And so if I'm going to commit to like 10 campaign sessions over a period of time, you know, you're going to go with the better game. But I still think Descent is very, very fun. I might pull it out again to try the app where it controls the enemy movements. But we should talk about how we did this. So we played a full campaign with 5 players, which is not something that's technically
5
supported.
heroes.
5 heroes, yeah. Not technically supported by the rules. We had one person Skyping in for most of it.
Yeah.
And we like literally hung webcams from the ceiling so that he could see the board. And then we ended up inventing 2 high concept metal albums based on our characters' exploits.
Right. The names, the song names were things like Attack Attack and To Never Be Immobilized.
Yes.
And what was the
I cut you in half vertically, part 2.
No, I cut you cut me in, or what, forward backflip or something.
Forward backflip was one. You cut me in half, part 2 vertically.
Yeah. And we had this whole like lore built up, and none of it was really based on things in game. It was just strange mechanics or experiences we had or situations that we ran into. And we developed this whole thing, and so I think what were we? I think this is still the name of our Wi-Fi. Yes. One of the song names, and so it's a part of our group lore now, and it's a great time.
Yeah.
It's not very balanced, so if you play a full campaign, it usually snowballs one way or the other by the end.
That's an issue with it. Yeah.
I think I played the Overlord, which controls all of the monster characters, the enemies in the dungeon, and I think I won, I don't know, 7 or 8 of the 10 like regular sessions.
Yeah, around there.
And then you guys finally unlocked your level 4 powers and new items, and then you one-shot the boss.
Oh yes,
the very end boss, and so it was a little anticlimactic. but over the whole course of it was, I thought it was a blast.
It was a blast, despite, I think, the game, but in some ways because of it, because it's a cheesy, generic fantasy, and it's got wild, swingy rolls and unbalanced missions and strange miniatures, creatures with their weird miniatures, like this thing that had mouths for hands or something.
My Flailing Mouth Hands.
Yes,
yeah,
that was one of the songs.
That was another song. Yeah.
The Flailing Mouth Hands. So, a very silly game and hilarious and a great time from our group, and that's honestly why it's on the list.
Yep.
Next on the list is, I think for sure... Let me think about this. Yes. Absolutely the weirdest game on this list. And that is 4X.
Oh. This is like Mark's dream game that we can't decide if it's good or not.
I honestly don't know if it's good or not, but I had a good time playing it, which is why it's on the list. Just the audacity of this strange little game.
Some of you may remember a number of months ago we had a podcast about impossible themes, and it seems like we keep being proven wrong on so-called impossible themes.
Right, one of them was romance, and then like the 2 weeks later we discovered Fog of Love.
Right. One of the other ones was accurate market simulations, which I think we disagreed on terminology a little bit.
Right.
But the point, you were making the point that most games don't simulate a real market because there's an endpoint and some other
I had a few
characteristics of of real markets. And then we discovered this 4X, which this is one of the Twitter recommendations you got from this publisher, right?
Right, yeah. So I don't remember how it started. Oh no, I made a Twitter post where I commented that I never have played a Hex Encounter war game, even though I love war games and I have a bunch of them. There are going to be a bunch in this list. They're mostly card-driven war games. And then Tom Russell, the guy who designed this game, and the publisher at Hollandspiel, gave me this huge list of recommendations. He's like, I have all the best Hex Encounter games. Try this one or this one or this one. And I'm like, great, I'll go buy one. And I bought a Hex Encounter war game. But while I was on the website and he was having a sale at the time, I saw this, which I had vaguely heard of a few months before. And I'm like, oh, it's a non-random currency manipulation and trading game. We should actually explain how this game works.
Yeah, so, despite the name, the name 4X is not like your traditional 4X, explore, expand, whatever. It's foreign exchange.
Right.
So there's a giant big table of currencies. Actually, like 80% of the game size is just this big table of relative values of currencies, or an exchange table.
Yeah.
Currency exchanges. And all the actions you do in the game will bump up some currencies or devalue others.
Right. And so, yeah, you're just going around and like shorting currencies or investing in currencies or trading currencies. And then at the end of the game, after all this, which everything you do manipulates the price of something, you kind of count up how much money you have in the most valuable currency and see who wins.
Yep.
And honestly, I have literally no clue of what a good strategy in this game is. I don't even remember if I ended up with more money than I began with at the beginning of the game when we played, but it was fascinating. I think just the strangeness and audacity of this game makes it deserving of mention, and I need to play it more to try to figure out what on earth is going on with it.
Yeah, I will say it is quite obtuse to get into, and I don't mean that as a criticism. It's just wrapping your mind around what these actions do and their effect in game is a little bit harder because none of us are, stock traders or market traders or anything. I've done a little bit of reading, so I would think I was able to recognize, oh, this action is conceptually a short, and this action is I don't know if I guess you could say long, but you're investing in it.
You're kind of you're not betting on it, you're investing in it. I
Yeah.
guess. Or you're like, no, you're not investing. You're like utilizing it. I don't know.
It's hard to explain,
Yeah.
but I think I was able to find this one kind of loop, if you will, to use kind of like Euro terminology, like a feedback loop of investing in a currency, to pump it up, then what's the word? Then applying for a contract in that currency, which is essentially a short, and then I was able to divest all of those shares of that currency
Right.
that I had to drive it down, and then fulfill the contract and net value. And I was able to do that a couple times more effectively than you and Matt were, and ended up winning.
Yeah, which seems to be the way to go. But of course, everything you do, everything everyone else does, affects what you're doing. So you kind of want to piggyback on what other people are doing. But then if everyone does that, no one gets ahead. It's incredibly interactive in that way.
I think what I described is the base strategy loop that you would probably, that's the first strategy that you probably try to execute, but then you have to pivot based on what other people are doing and decide, do I go off on my own and try to pump up this one currency that no one else is going for right now and try to cash in big, or do I piggyback and try to go big on this one currency? So if they are doing a 4 for 8, maybe I can do a 10 for 40 or something like that.
Right. Yeah. We got to play this again, but I think you and I might be the only ones now still interested in it, and I don't think it even plays at 2-player. I don't think it'd be good at 2 players.
Yeah, we'd have to find another player, and it hurts your brain. So
In a good way.
It just hurts your brain.
Yes. Next on the list is a game we just got at PAX East, and I kept playing it over and over, like in lines and waiting for the doors to open at PAX East, and played it a couple of times since then, and that is this little game here, the Shipwreck Arcana, from Meromorph Games. I had to remember the publisher on that. We met the designers at PAX East, and I was drawn immediately to the beautiful, beautiful art in this game, this little box. I love games that have kind of a white base and put the art on the white, like Tokaido or something like that. And that's what this game does. And this is kind of a little mathy cooperative deduction game where on your turn, you're going to draw 2 chits from a bag, and they're going to have a number between 1 and 7 on each of them. And then you place one of them down in front of one of 5 cards, and each card has some kind of specific function on it, I suppose, or specific
some restriction.
Yeah, criteria.
Yeah.
So it'll be like if one of your tiles is a 1, 2, and 3, and the other one or a 1, 2, or 3, and the other one isn't, place the 1, 2, or 3 here. Or if one of your tiles is double or triple the value of the other one, place the lower one here.
Right.
And so you choose which one you're placing in front of, and then everyone else eventually will need to guess at which tile you didn't play.
Right. So you're trying to give them a clue such that they can guess the other tile that you have kept hidden. And there's a timing mechanic where higher number tiles cost more pips, and they will exhaust these criteria cards sooner. And whenever one of those criteria cards, or what are they called? I forget what they're called.
I don't remember. It's some thematic.
Right. So the tiles, I think, are called fates, and the whatever. Anyways, whenever one of those cards exhausts, you lose. Well, you progress 2 points towards losing the game if you have not guessed correctly that round.
Right. And so it's an interesting case because it's a game in which, if you're not stupid like me, in the last time we played, you can figure out most of the time the exact odds if you guessed.
You can usually, if everyone's playing intelligently, you can usually get it down to a 1 and 2 or 1 and 3.
Right. Which normally I would say that's not particularly engaging because you know the exact odds. But I think the logical deduction in trying to figure out all of not only what it could possibly be based on the tile, on the card they did play on, but maybe other possibilities they could have played on but chose not to, in trying to narrow it down. That whole logical deductive thing is so fun to do as like a casual game. And the thing I kept commenting is like if I was in middle school and got this game, I would have ate it up because I was all into that kind of logical deduction, logic puzzles. You know, a dog and two cats are trying to cross the river, and they, you know, those kinds of logic puzzles. Mm-hmm. And this is just that over and over again.
Right. I think this might be a great precursor to programming.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Because it's just pure
as,
logic.
As like almost an education game or something like that. Or just for people who like that sort of thinking. Actually, Mark introduced this game as, this is a great game. When I heard the description, that I knew the three of us would love it, and I've never lost or even missed one clue.
I hadn't until the last game we played.
And then I played right after that with Matt, and we promptly lost.
Yes.
Although, to be fair, I think one of us missed a obvious clue.
A critical, yeah.
And so there's not a lot of room for error. There's a little time to decide how comfortable you are guessing, but then you get to a point where you have to make a decision. But it doesn't take that long. So
yeah, little 15-minute game.
Yep.
Super fun. That's the Shipwreck Arcana. What number are we on?
92, maybe?
93.
93?
Number 93 I do not own, but we played it maybe 8-10 months ago at a meetup, and that is Isle of Skye. Did you play this one with us?
Doesn't sound familiar.
It is a game set in Scotland, I believe, and it is a tile placement game. Kind of looks like Carcassonne, has a similar kind of pastoral aesthetic, but you're making your own individual areas, basically, and scoring points based on that. But the twist is that you're auctioning the tiles. So everyone gets a set, I believe it's, equal to the number of players of tiles, and then you secretly all simultaneously price each of the tiles, and then you go around, I don't remember if it's bidding or just purchasing tiles from other people, and then the one that's left over you get at the end. So it's a fun little game of trying to price things as high as possible that you think that other people want, and then maybe although I think you have to end up buying the tile you're left with. So if you really want one and you price it super high, you still have to pay for that.
Okay.
At the end. And just combine those two things really, really well. Sort of a lighter game. And I think dependent on the group being knowledgeable and competent about how to manage value in board games. So if you had 3 seasoned players of this game and one newbie, the newbie would be squashed probably because they just don't know how to value the pricing aspect of it.
I imagine there might also develop a metagame if you played with similar people.
Yes, there would definitely be a metagame aspect to it, but really pleasant and enjoyable. I had a great time with it. And that is Isle of Skye, which was a pretty big hit, I think, from a couple years ago. Number 92 is Time of Crisis, which I've got right here from GMT, which is a lightish for GMT standards. So I'd say about as complex as Twilight Struggle. Would you agree with that? Ish.
I don't know. I guess thereabouts. Maybe a tad easier.
Maybe. It is a multiplayer war game, but also a deck builder of like a fairly slow deck builder with not a huge card pool of different options to build your deck with. So it's not like Dominion where everything's kind of randomized or you select from a big pool of cards. In this game, all the cards you can build your deck out of are the same each game. It's just a matter of when you buy cards, in what order, and how you utilize them. And what you're trying to do is essentially expand and take over Roman rule and try to squeeze as many points out of that as possible before you get ousted. So it's this kind of musical chairs thing of jumping into Italy and taking Roman rule, fending off barbarians, and a really interesting concept. I think the problem is the first couple times we played it, we got a critical rule wrong, and that kind of soured the experience. But the last time we played it, we played more or less correctly and had a good time with it. And I think we're still have different opinions on what good strategies are here. So it's a game I want to explore further, but really fascinating, really fun. It's kind of a lighter war game.
Yeah, I mean, as far as war games go.
As far as war games go, yeah.
I think Matt's comment on this was he immediately wanted to play it again, maybe more so than anything he's played in the last year or something.
Yeah, Matt really liked it.
Yeah.
More than I thought he would.
Which is funny because this is a game that I think is prone to AP, which is something that he is notorious for.
Yeah. I think that's mostly our fault more than his fault.
Him being notorious about it, or
yeah, the notoriety.
Oh well, yeah.
We
definitely.
play it up a bit. He's gotten a lot better at it.
Yeah. So it surprised me a little bit that he had that strong a positive opinion. I like the game. I think there's enough randomness where it's not the same each time.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also plan a strategy and then execute it. One thing I do like is that when it's easier to build back up from almost nothing. So it's very difficult to completely eliminate a player.
Right.
You can definitely beat someone down, but the way it works is like each additional region you want to control or each additional legion in an army costs one more. So the first one costs 1, then 2, then 3, and so on. And so for someone to build back up from nothing to a 2-stack army only costs 3 points.
Right.
Whereas if you have a 3-stack army, to get another one costs 4. So they can get almost as strong as you again. And it just, the way the cards work. Oh, we should also mention, with this game, you choose your next hand of cards.
Yes, which is very important.
Which is very unique and important to the strategy. So you choose a hand of cards. There are 3 different colors that give you different action points that you use for. It's basically military, governing, and economy or
society,
civics. And so you will buy better. You start with 3 ones in each color, and then you choose a hand of 5 from all your available cards, and you have to go through your whole deck before you recycle. And then you can buy 2, 3, or 4
power cards,
cost and power cards in each of those colors that have some other effect. And so there's a trashing mechanic, and you're improving your deck over time, and then you're balancing these different sorts of actions. So there's a lot of interesting things there. I think definitely better at 3, best at 4.
Yeah, not a good 2-player game.
2 players,
3 to 4 players.
Yeah, 2 players. You really the problem is probably half the map gets just cut off as impassable out of the game essentially, and so the 2 of you are fighting over 5 regions plus Rome. So it's really just this back and forth. And just it wasn't as compelling.
Yeah. The thing that's interesting is that it's highly strategic in that you kind of want to go into the game knowing what your deck composition is going to look like at the end of the game. And I think we figured out that generally you probably want to go mainly for 2 out of the 3 colors.
like most games, you can't do everything. So
Right. It's better to specialize.
it's better
a
to
bit.
focus on something and then have a secondary.
But so that's highly strategic, but the actual play on the map is oftentimes very tactical because players can do very big actions. It's not one of those games where you have to like build up an army slowly and then slowly move them over and then slowly mount a planned assault. It's like I'm moving over here and I'm moving here and I'm taking your thing here and I'm causing chaos.
If you planned a hand for it, you
If
could
you planned
have
a hand
like
for it.
8 red mill points, so you could create a new army, build it up a couple times, move 2 spaces, and attack someone,
Right.
which is monstrously, like, hugely swingy. Or you can trigger like 3 different battles against barbarians and get 10 points in 1 turn, and the game goes to 60.
Yeah. So that part of the map part of it ends up being very tactical because you have to react to these big things other players are doing and the randomness of the barbarians, which kind of just poke their nose in to various parts of the map from the borders.
Yeah.
Which is based on dice rolling. So an intriguing game. I would not be surprised if we play this a few more times in the next year and it jumps up on the list.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not 100% certain on it right now, but it is definitely an intriguing and enjoyable game. We just gotta play it with the correct rules some more.
Yeah. That is the rule book is not super easy to read.
It's
so.
not GMT's best rule book for sure.
Yeah.
It's poorly organized, I'd say. Number 91, again a game that I've gotten recently, and I don't think Orion has played it yet, but I got to play it a few times with various groups, and that is Deception Murder in Hong Kong. Have I told you anything about this game?
You said it's a social deduction game, and I forget if you said anything else.
Yeah, so social deduction game. How it works is that one player is like the investigator, and they know who the murderer is, and wait, did I get that wrong?
Usually that's not how it works.
They know.
but-
Yeah, sorry. They know who the murderer is and the weapon and the clue left at the crime scene. So each person will have 4 weapons and 4 clues in front of them. And one person's the murderer, the other one's the investigator. And the murderer reveals a murder weapon and a clue from their set to the investigator. And then the investigator clues everyone on trying to discover the murder weapon and the clue. So it'll be things like location of the crime, and there'll be like 6 or 7 options, and they choose like the vacation home, or people in the area heard prolonged noise or sudden noise. And so they're narrowing down the possibilities, but then everyone's together trying to discuss on which one is which. So obviously if there's suspicion cast on you, you want to cast suspicion on someone else's murder weapon and clue, but then that could tip off that you're maybe the murderer. It's an intriguing concept, and I did have a good time with it. I think we got to play it. I think it has a lot of potential to go up on the list in the future, but we got to play it and kind of develop a meta, I think, as a lot of these social deduction games need to have to be really, really great. But it was intriguing, and I did enjoy it quite a bit, just as a unique twist on social deduction I hadn't seen before.
All right.
You didn't seem enthused on that one.
No, not really.
Number 90 is a game that Matt owns that I thought was here, but I couldn't find the box, and that is Evolution Climate, which is the version of North Star Games Evolution series that we have. And it's, I'd say, a highly tactical, tableau-ish builder card game where you're trying to evolve your species to outwit other players. So it's got this kind of bluffing thing going on where you can for instance, turn into a carnivore and start eating the other players, but then the other players could predict that you're going to do that and develop like shells, so it's really hard for the carnivores to eat you. On top of that, everyone is, through a variety of mechanisms, contributing to a collective like herbivore food source at the watering hole each round, which then you can manipulate and play out so that some people don't get food, or maybe you hog all the food and you're able to develop your species. It's really swingy, I think, and it does require a good knowledge of the cards available. So I'd say it's deeper than it seems at first for a medium light game. But once you're playing with everyone who knows the cards and knows the kind of rock, paper, scissors thing at play, it is really fun. I enjoy it quite a bit. Even though I think the first couple times I played it, I didn't get it. But after maybe 2 more plays, I kind of understood, okay, it is a bluffing, tactical, rock, paper, scissors game, basically.
Yeah, it's a fun game for sure. There's some interesting considerations, especially with how as the first player rotates, of if you're the first to get to eat from the pool and you set up a big chain, you can try to really tank the food supply and starve everyone else out, or things like that.
Yeah, so lots of interesting things like that. I know Matt loves the game mostly because of the evolutionary theme.
And
that's literally his favorite theme of board games.
Yeah,
in the world.
I guess this one isn't really dinosaurs. It's just like evolution.
Well, that's what he really likes. Dinosaurs are a bonus.
Yeah.
Although we've been joking for a while that like games need more dinosaurs, and dinosaurs I think is the new thing now.
Is it?
Well, there's the dinosaur theme park. I think there are 2 dinosaur theme park games that have come out or are coming out recently. And then I think a Jurassic Park game was just announced.
Really?
Dinosaurs is the new thing. I mean, it's better than zombies, so.
And now, it's going to be a dinosaurs versus zombies like spin-off movie or something.
I mean, Smash Up has that market, but there's going to be...
there's going to be for sure.
Yeah.
And then they'll throw in ninjas and as an expansion or something. And
yeah. And then Smash Up's going to be like, hey, I already did this. And then we're all going to be like, hey, you're not a very good game. Burn! Smash Up is not in my top 100. But number 89, we are on 89, right? Yes, indeed. Number 89 is 1960, The Making of the President, another GMT game. I will spoil a bit and say that I believe there are 13 GMT games in my list.
They are by far your favorite publisher.
12 GMT games on my list, which is the most of any publisher by a decent margin. This is a sequel of sorts. Well, it's like a spiritual sequel to Twilight Struggle, which, spoiler alert, will be higher on this list. And it is about the presidential race between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, a famously close presidential race here in the United States in, as you could guess, 1960. And if you want to try this card-driven war game thing, this is probably a good entry point. It's, I'd say, a good deal simpler than Twilight Struggle. And in some senses, that's great for people who kind of want to ease into the category. In other ways, I think it's clearly not as good as Twilight Struggle, and the simplicity's kind of at fault there. But still, I think it's a really solid game.
I think it's less punishing, which makes it perhaps easier to get into.
Yeah, I would say that.
I'm just
Yeah. No, I
don't want
agree.
to go and talk about Twilight Struggle because we'll do that later and we've done it before. But that the Twilight Struggle is so much about the tension of having to play your opponent's cards, and this game does not have that to the same degree.
Yeah. This one feels more like, well, okay, they're both like tug of war games. Twilight Struggle is like this multi-dimensional tug of war where you're battling on different fronts and different mind games. This one is much more a tug of war of, I put influence in this state. no, I put influence in this state, and you're just going back and forth and trying to put as much influence down as possible, and control various things, which again I think is a good thing in terms of the simplicity, but takes away, I guess it's not as multidimensional in its strategy as Twilight Struggle. But I think it's really enjoyable. Unfortunately, I believe the one time you played it was some of the worst luck I've ever seen in a board game, so you're a bit soured on it.
Yeah, I will say, before I was too tilted by the RNG, I think I had been watching House of Cards around that, or like shortly before that, and so I was kind of in the mindset of like thinking about elections and strategically like going and making a speech here, or like what's the value of these different stuff. So in that sense, I like that part of it, because you feel like you're touring around the country trying to stabilize or build up a region while the other player is tearing down some other base of support, and then you're hurrying back over there to build it up again, but it costs a lot of tempo to change regions, and it's much more efficient to stay in one region, but of course you can't win the election with only one region.
Yeah, and another game like Twilight Struggle and Evolution, where knowledge of the cards is pretty important, because there's some key events in there that you need to watch out for. I do enjoy the debate mechanism, where you're like saving cards throughout play, and then at a point in the middle of the game you just like pause for a debate, which can swing things pretty dramatically. But to win the debate, you kind of have to save high-powered cards and not play them during the normal pace of the game, which can put you at a disadvantage. So you're weighing that, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting trade-off. And then the like a lot of the different actions you can do there's the basic placing influence cubes, but you can also go try to get endorsements, which break ties and give you any empty states, I think.
Endorsements are
and
powerful,
then
yeah.
There's like the radio that gives you, I forget those tokens or something.
Yeah, which
and
do
there's the issues
things.
Which are just bonus points. But yeah, there's enough there to make it a good game. We'll play it again sometime. And it feels
cooling off.
It feels kind of
Ryan's
like
bad
the election. I think you kind of get some of that thematic experience, which makes it cool.
Oh, certainly, yeah, very thematic, and cool bit of history too. Number 88. Let me put this away. Number 88 is a game that we do not own, but I think is really interesting and really fun, and that is Alchemists from CGE, which is a fairly heavy worker placement game where you're designing potions as alchemists, and you're like gathering ingredients. But then it has this funky like mini satire of the university system, where you're publishing like research papers, but then other people can prove them wrong. And then that's all wrapped around this deduction game of trying to figure out what ingredients do what. And you have this like deduction triangle you're putting chits in to figure out as you test things, which utilizes an app. So you put in, I don't remember the specifics, but you put in certain inputs and it tells you something, and you could deduce things out of that. So you're trying to like do that really efficiently with the worker placement thing and publish correct grants, but then also see what other people are doing, and then try to not deduce but induce information. Not induce. That's not the word I'm thinking of. There's deductive and inductive. Would it be induce? Is that the verb? It's deduce.
Sure, we can.
Sure. You're inducing.
Induct?
That sounds inducting?
No, I don't know.
I don't know. All of these words sound wrong in my mind.
I mean,
anyway, you're getting information from other players based on the actions in like the research papers they're publishing, and they have other information, that
Don't
about the
you all have some secret information? Or when you
as
try a
test
potion,
things,
right.
as you test things, either on yourself or on your assistant, which is hilarious.
Right.
You get information, but everyone is testing different things, so everyone has different information throughout the game. But then, based on what they're doing, you're like, ooh, maybe they actually figured out this one, and maybe I should guess that they're correct on that, and that I don't have to test that potion. So there's all this mind game stuff going along in the midst of this pretty heavy worker placement system. It's got that fun CGE art that you'll see in like Dungeon Lords, similar to that. And
It has great pop-ups, right? It's got like this player screen where you hide your stuff behind.
Yeah. It's got great components, really fun art, and I really enjoyed that game.
Yeah, I think I've only played it once, maybe twice. But
Maybe
it was
twice.
fun.
I don't remember. It's been a while, but
Yeah.
I still have great memories of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't mind if I've always considered buying that one whenever I'm making a new cool stuff order, but it just slips out.
Yeah.
But maybe I should make it a priority because I do have really good memories of that one. That is Alchemists, published by CGE, which is, I believe, the publisher with the second most number of titles on my list with 8.
Shout out to Vlada.
Yeah, Vlada Cavallo, responsible for most of those. But although Alchemist is not a Vlada game, it's I don't remember who it is actually. Sorry, whoever designed that game.
But good job.
Good job. Next, number 87, I think probably a controversial selection in my top 100 games of all time. And that is Scrabble, the classic word game Scrabble, but not really a word game, more of an area control war game in my mind.
I don't know about that one.
I think there's a strong argument to be made that Scrabble is more of a war game than it is a game about language. Now, if you're going to play semi-well, you probably want to like memorize the list of 2-letter words. But beyond that, you don't need a whole lot until you enter the super competitive scene. And I think there's a lot of interesting play to be made on controlling the opportunities that your opponents have to play words on the board to get like the triple and double word scores or the double letter scores. I think that is a really fascinating part of the game, and I enjoy coming up with words from the letters I have. It's not a modern board game, so I don't get to play it a lot. Amber, my wife, and I played a few times back in high school. We were into it for a bit, and I still really enjoy Scrabble and think it is a highly underrated game and that people should take a look at it, people in the modern board game hobby. But you're a numbers person, and so you're just grinning over there and not commenting.
I got far enough into math where it was more letters than numbers, but that's something different entirely.
That's true. Number 86 is a game I do not have here, and that is Caverna, the Uwe Rosenberg game. Will not be the first Uwe game, or will not be the only Uwe game on this list, but this is probably his most popular game at this point.
Really?
I would say so. Agricola was...
It's the most famous, of course.
I think Agricola is the most groundbreaking, but I think Caverna's probably more popular with people. I think probably, they're close because they're very, very similar. Caverna is basically a sequel to Agricola. And instead of doing kind of a realistic look at sustenance farming, you're instead dwarves in your little cave, and you can build stuff out in the fields like in Agricola and have animals and such. Or you can explore and build into your cave. I think the coolest part of the game is this kind of questing system where you can get like attack strength, and I don't remember the specifics, but you go out and
you buy
rewards.
Weapons, basically.
Yeah, you get weapons,
and then those unlock certain difficulty quests, which give you increasingly rewards. And I think once you do a quest, it's done, and then like once you do the difficulty 3 quest, that one's gone, and the next person has to do a 4 quest or something like that.
Yeah, so if multiple people go for these quests. You can get a lot of competition there, and then that opens up more room for doing other strategies. So one of those games with a good number of different kind of discrete strategies you can go for, but you kind of want to be unique in that regard and kind of separate yourself from other people. And just a massive game in terms of components.
Yeah.
Like, the setup for that game is insane, because there are all these different buildings and things you can build as you explore through as you kind of build up your cave system. And then they're like end game segments you want to work towards, as with many Euro games. And I distinctly remember the time we played with Bubba that you sniped the end game segment that I had been working towards the entire game, causing me to lose. Good times.
That game was a little overwhelming in the amount of things you could buy. There's a lot of tension in choosing your actions because, like his other games, I think you're most taxed on your actions because you only get, a couple action discs to use, and you need to do about 8 things, and you can only do 3 of them.
Yeah, it's more sandboxy, though, than Agricola,
for sure.
But still, it has that, yeah.
But the thing I remember is just there being, like, 2 boards full of unique buildings on every side of the main game board, and there must have been about 80 options or something, and it was just too much to think about, so I think I only bought things from the board in front of me because it would have taken too long otherwise. But once you know the game more, I can see that being...
Yeah, it's one of those games where once you know it more, you know the different lines of play, and you can adapt around that. It's a fun game. Arcilla6 from the live stream says he agrees on Scrabble, so 1 point to me.
All right.
If you're listening to the podcast, we are in fact live streaming this podcast for the public.
The whole series, right?
The whole series. So if you're listening to this one on the podcast and you want to check out the next one live, look at or follow me on Twitter or Facebook. I am posting the information there mostly. I will probably post the time for the next one on the website as well. So if you follow me in any capacity on social media or follow the website, keep an eye out for the date of the next live recording, and you two can agree with me on things and not agree with Orion.
Boo.
That's a requirement for watching, by the way.
False.
And I guess I should say right now, if you do enjoy this live stream, we do offer live streams of every one of our main podcasts. So the ones that I number, there's not a whole lot of differentiation. So this I consider an off-week podcast, but every other week is our main podcast, and we do stream that live for supporters on Patreon. So for just $1 or $2 a month, you can support us on Patreon. We recently did our taxes, of course, and I was a little bit distraught at how much the Thoughtful Gamer was in the red last year. I'm hoping for the upcoming tax season, I suppose, or fiscal year, to at least break even, but we need Patreon supporters for that. If you do enjoy watching the podcast like this or want to get in on that and get in on our awesome Discord community, go to patreon.com/thethoughtfulgamer. All right, enough advertisement. Let's move on to the next game. Number 85, and that is Exceed Fighting System, I guess it's called. There's a number of different... I'll explain it in a bit after I pull up the box here, and that is from Brad Talton Jr. from Level 99 Games, and it is a 2-player game trying to kind of capture the spirit of arcade fighting games. So it's the Exceed Battle System or something.
It's basically Street Fighter.
Yes.
In a board game or in a box.
In a card game.
In a card game.
Yeah, it's all cards. And so he sells like 2 decks in each box, and they're like $10-15, I think. And there are a handful of them released right now. I don't know if there's any big box implementation, but if you just buy 2 fighters, actually it might be 4 fighters in the box. I don't remember. But if you just buy one of those, you'll have plenty to play with. You don't need to buy everything. And each of the fighters has completely different strategies and special abilities, and then a collection of kind of basic cards that all the fighters share.
Yeah, you have a deck of cards, and I think about a third to half of them are unique to your fighter.
Right.
And the rest are general moves. I think the most interesting part of this game is that you set out kind of an arena. What's it, 7 or 9 wide?
Yeah, so it's like a 2D fighting game. So it's all about relative distance.
And then
to the other fighter.
all the attack moves have a certain range that you can attack at. So one might be 3 to 6, but if you're adjacent to someone, you can't use that flying kick. You have to be across the map from them.
Right, and the other interesting thing is that every attack has a different speed rating. And for nearly all of the attacks, if you have the better speed rating, yours lands first and cancels out your opponent's attack.
Yep.
But, and we haven't gotten into this a whole lot in terms of like getting to know one of the fighters really well and strategizing, but there's a whole lot of potential, just like in a real 2D, fighting video game, for different combos to play off each other. And so there's a lot of interesting decisions in, do I want to keep attacking over and over and over, or do I want to kind of build up my power reserve and then like go into super mode where you get like this inherent character ability and unlock more powerful attacks? Or do I like poke at them and then run away and then try to do some long range attacks? It really captures the feel of those kinds of games, I think, brilliantly in just a little small box card game. Really fun to play. I think Matt and I are going to schedule someday to just play like 10 games of this. Just get, choose a character and get to really know them well and try to figure out, how to use that character really well, because they're all unique and all have different strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, in the couple times we've played, I've noticed that some characters tend to have more ranged attacks, so then they have moves that will push the other player away so that you can land your long-range attacks, and maybe the other person doesn't even have a card they can hit you back with. And you can prevent them from doing a lot of things with that sort of strategy. Or maybe you have a lot of actions where if you're one away, you cancel their card and attack, or, things like that.
Right. And again, like a couple of games we talked about just a little while ago, once you know the deck and know kind of the basic attacks and blocks and such, and know your deck really well, I think the game is going to expand and become that much more interesting, because when you do an attack, you're playing like a bluffing game. You play a 2-card, each player plays a card face down, and you reveal it simultaneously and compare the attacks. So that the potential of that kind of bluffing system really excites me.
Would you say it exceeds the initial play?
I would say that it exceeds. I can't even. I can't even get the words out of my mouth. Let's move on. To another small box card game with a bit of nostalgia to it, and that is Riftwalker.
Oh, this one. A
Storm Hollow card game, which back in the fledgling days of the Thoughtful Gamer was the first review copy that I received. The designer posted on Reddit and was like, hey, we're looking for reviews. And I, only having a month or two of the Thoughtful Gamer under my belt, kind of timidly messaged them and was like, I'm small and I don't have a huge audience yet, but I would love to review your game. And they were gracious enough to send out a review copy. And it ended up being a really fun game. It says 2 to 4 players on the box, and I will say a caveat, really, I think only a 2-player game. It's far, far too chaotic with 3 or 4 players. But I think it's a really unique 2-player card game experience, because there is this grid, I suppose, of different elements in the center. And how it works is you're playing cards from your hand that had different powers and abilities, but every time you do that, you're manipulating that central grid of elements. And to score any card, which is the only way to get points, you have to line up tic-tac-toe style 3 elements of that color.
Of the matching color.
The matching color for that card. But both players are manipulating it. So it's this really cool system where you're trying to get into a position where you're one move away or one manipulation away from lining up 3 in a row
Usually
without letting your opponent do the same thing.
Usually you're flipping them, right? And then there are a few things that move them.
You're either flipping them or swapping it out with top card of the deck.
That's right.
So they're double-sided cards. So you can always see the potential for, like, if everything was flipped, how it would be arranged. But when you're manipulating it that way. But once you have 3 in a row of a particular color, when you score that card, nothing on the grid changes. So then if your opponent has that same color ready to score, then they just can immediately score again. So you can almost help your opponent in that way. And it's really thinky that I wouldn't have expected from a little tiny box game like this, card game like this. And at 2 players, I think is super fascinating. We found a couple card combos that seem quite good in terms, especially ones that let you score cards without utilizing the middle grid.
Yep.
But I think I've been able to play around that at 2 player.
We found in 3 or 4 players, if you nailed one of those combos, you tended to run away with the game because it was too hard to score the regular way because there's 4 people manipulating the elements and it's just too hard to
too much changes between your turns.
Right. Yeah. Whereas in a 2-player game, you can utilize Zugzwang and force them into a position where you win either way.
Yeah, and the cool thing, and I don't think I made this clear earlier, is that you manipulate the grid at the beginning of your turn. That's the first thing you do. So you want the turn to pass to you where you can do one thing and then score. And so you're also trying to set up the board so that your opponent isn't able to do one thing and then score. And then because you have to play the cards face down to be able to, or face up to be able to score them, you kind of know what colors they're going for. So I think it twists my mind in a way that I haven't seen another game do. And I don't think has a lot of recognition. So if you want something unique, a little bit more thinky than, other lighter 2-player games like Star Realms or something, I would certainly recommend Riftwalker, a Storm Hollow card game.
You like that chess reference there?
Wait.
Zugzwang? It's a German term for a situation where anything you're not currently losing, but any move you do puts you in a losing situation.
Oh, interesting.
And so it's a chess term of often applied to end games where it's like king and pawn end games where you're trying to get in a situation where they have to move out of the space they need to be in, which lets you advance your pawn or something like that. I
did not know the name for that, but when I went a couple months ago on a stint of watching a whole bunch of chess YouTube videos, I always enjoyed the games where someone put their opponent in a situation where the ideal play was for the opponent, if they could, to just pass their turn. Yeah. But they can't.
Right. You have to move. I think
that's a super cool dynamic. The fact that you have to do something ends up being a detriment to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fascinating part of games you don't see a lot. What's it called again? Zugzwang?
Yeah, it's a German term, so I'm probably saying it wrong, but that's how I've read and pronounced it.
Yeah, I think there's a similar term in Go, a Japanese term.
Probably.
Or a Chinese term.
It's that sort of tempo of, that sort of concept.
Yeah. Number 83 is a really beautiful game that we played a couple months ago, and that is Sagrada. A game about building up a stained glass window, but instead of using glass, you're using little colored translucent dice in a grid, and you have to place them according to certain rules based on your own personalized little window thing, and then try to score points based on other randomized certain rules. And it's a little drafting game, so you roll the dice, and you pick one, your opponent picks one, and you place it on your little stained glass window and try to maximize points. Really casual, lighter game, easy to learn, but an enjoyable little puzzle, I think. I think we played it at 2 players, and I think that might be the ideal because you can do lots more blocking plays, which tends to be a general rule of thumb, I think, for drafting games like that.
And 2-player games.
And 2-player games where blocking becomes just as significant as advancing something on your turn. which I enjoyed a lot. And again, it looks amazing. Has tons of little beautiful dice in it. So you can't say anything bad about that.
Yeah, that was great fun.
Yeah, really solid game. We only got 2 left. Number 82, which I do have here. The classic, and now officially going to be, I saw in a news release from Asmodee, in their, quote, modern classics line of games, Ticket to Ride Europe. And they specifically chose Europe, which I think is a good move. It is my preferred version of Ticket to Ride, at least between this and the original. I haven't played one of the other...
America, right?
Yeah,
or
the
United
original's
States.
in United States, yeah. I do like the Europe one because it allows you to get out of kind of bad luck situations where you're completely blocked. It makes it less cutthroat than the original one.
I think it also adds stations, right?
That's the stations thing.
Okay, yeah.
It also adds tunnels, which require more cards for certain
It's kind of a
longer
push your luck
routes.
thing as well.
Yeah.
So it adds just a little bit more, lets you mitigate a bad situation a bit. I think more interesting routes, maybe. I don't know.
I generally like European maps better than US maps. The problem is, and this is the same thing in Ticket to Ride and Power Grid, that the United States geographically with its cities is so lopsided, where you have this big mass of large cities in like the Northeast going down the Atlantic coast,
right,
and then like California, and everything in between is more rural.
There's like Chicago, but then there's 2,000 miles to go.
Yeah, you get like Chicago, you go down south to St. Louis.
A couple in
and
Texas,
then,
Denver, but like there's so much empty space in between.
Yeah.
So.
Which, I mean, isn't a problem. I love that America's super diverse geographically, but
for board game balance.
board gaming, it tends to be less interesting, I think. Those are the 2 games that come to mind, specifically that have a European and a US version. It's just such a cleverly designed game where the opposite of the thing we were just talking about in chess, where the fact that you can only do one thing on your turn and not more things, is what brings the tension to the game, because you can either draw cards, these train cards that you're trying to build into, or you're trying to collect sets of basically, or you can play a set of cards to lay your trains on a route. And the fact that you can only do one of those and not both brings inherent tension to the game, because if you see the right colors you want for like an extended plan, but you also have a route in hand that you could play, if you draw cards, someone else could play on your route before your next turn comes around.
Yep.
And for a game that has like 3 rules to it, I think that's a really elegant design. And, we haven't played in a while. It's a lighter design. We tend to play heavier games more. But for, I think, a classic of board gaming and something to bring people into the hobby and say, here's a really clever, interesting game, this would be one of my top picks.
Right. For someone who's only played Sorry or Monopoly, this is a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. I think the step in the right direction, unless they're, for something I think really light, this is where I would go. There's a game maybe on next podcast's list. Let's see.
There's other entry-level games that we have liked a lot, but this is the classic.
There's a game in my top 50 that competes with it, but it's a little bit more complicated. I love this game. I love it so much. It's just... I like it now more theoretically as a design, and like I appreciate it more than I enjoy playing it, because again, we're into heavier games now. But it should not be forgotten. That is Ticket to Ride Europe.
What's the one where you draw a tile and place it? The pastoral themed Carcassonne.
Carcassonne.
I think I have a similar opinion about Carcassonne in that I appreciate it kind of for what it was or is as a design, but I don't necessarily want to play it all the time.
Carcassonne may or may not be higher on my top 100 list.
I think it is definitely higher on Mark's 100 top 100 list.
And by higher, I mean a lower number. Anyway. Final game for this list. We've done pretty well at getting through this without spending 3 hours talking about the games. I'm very pleased with what we have accomplished here.
Yep.
The final game for today's list, number 81 of my top 100 games of all time, is Three Kingdoms Redux, which we just got to play a couple months ago, and I found to be a really interesting game. A specifically 3-player game, which you don't see a lot, but I find that design constraint to be completely fascinating. I'd love to come up with a good 3-player game design idea. I think that's a very difficult challenge, and I enjoy seeing how certain designers try to overcome that. In this one, it's a worker placement game, kind of. Well, it's a worker placement game in which you're kind of like bidding for your spots. So each of your workers is unique. Each of your generals or diplomats in your Chinese army.
I think they're all generals, but they're essentially your
Are they
workers.
all generals?
They're all
Yeah,
generals, yeah.
They function as workers.
They have
in a
two.
worker
They have an
placement
admin
game.
stat and a military admin rating and military rating, and essentially you're bidding with that rating on either an admin spot or a military action spot.
Right. So if you put down a 3 admin on an admin spot, someone else could come in and put a 4, and then if you don't outbid them with another worker, you're not going to get that action that turn.
Yep.
Which is really interesting because, again, it's a 3-player game, and the people, I can't remember exactly how the initiative is determined, but the 2 people in the lowest initiative are ostensibly allied, and then the person at the very bottom chooses a spot, and then them and their ally don't block each other in that spot, so they can both get that spot out of the 9 to 10 areas.
I think there's 12 in the common
Is it 12?
area.
It's 4x3.
I believe so.
So there's lots of little stuff like that, and then you have a border on each side that you're fighting over, kind of really in an abstract way, where you commit your generals to that fight, and you can get valuable points that way. But once you commit them to that fight, you can't use them to take other actions. So you have to determine if you want to try to get points early, because that gives you a points income.
Right. You get drip points every turn for the number of armies you have stationed, but you lose essentially one action pawn or one worker, and you have to pay the upkeep on that army.
Right. So a variety of different strategies, again, you can do in this game. In the game we played, I think kind of had similar strategies of trying to kind of balance everything, get a little bit of drip points from our military, but still utilize our workers in doing various actions. And then the third guy we were playing with chose a strategy that essentially only cashed in on end game points. And he ended up winning, and we were all surprised and delighted.
He went purely pacifist, and I think I had 25 points on him before we started endgame scoring, and on a game that went to like 45 or something like that, and he ended up winning by like 2 points.
Yeah, it was close, and I think the design does a good job at making sure the game stays close.
Mm-hmm.
In a more elegant way than some of the other 3-player games I've played, or like specifically 3-player games, and I was delighted to see that kind of pacifist strategy could pay off, because there's a number of different ways you can cash in points at the end, but they require different priorities with what you're doing with your workers. So that kind of variety is really interesting. I'd heard incredible things about it, like, people saying it's like, one of the best games ever made, and I think it's very, very good. But ultimately, it's a worker placement game. Like, it's not mind-blowing in any dramatic way, but I think it's a very solid design in a lot of little subtle ways that makes it an exciting game.
I think it's a very elegant 3-player tug-of-war.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting decisions. I think probably the other, without thinking too hard, most famous 3-player game that we've played is Churchill.
Right.
And I think I enjoyed Three Kingdoms Redux more. I don't know which one I would necessarily rate higher. Probably Three Kingdoms, because I enjoyed it more.
Sure.
But there's a similar tension, but in both of those, of this 3-player mechanic where you can't beat both other people, so you have to pick your battles
Right.
and try to squeeze out all the efficiency you can.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think as a concept, the specifically 3-player game is completely fascinating. I hope we get more of them, even though I can imagine they're incredibly difficult design, but this is definitely a good one.
For sure.
And that is the first 20 games on the list of my countdown of the top 100 games of all time. We will reconvene in roughly 2 weeks to do the next installment of this. Hopefully, Matt and Ben and Amber and other people will be here and won't be busy during that time. But again, I will post that on social media. So don't forget to follow me on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, or you can be like a subscriber to the website and get an email whenever anything is posted there. Don't forget to look at the website. I posted, I think it was an interesting article today. It was a bit unique from things I usually write, and I succumbed and did the most clickbaity title I have ever done in an article. Did you see that, Ryan?
I saw the title and I resisted clicking on it out of
I felt
principle.
really bad, but also the title made sense. It made sense.
All right.
I
haven't read
I'll
it.
never do it again. Anyways, as I said before, if you want to watch our other podcasts, our main podcasts live, go to patreon.com/thethoughtfulgamer and help us out there so that we don't lose lots of money this next fiscal year. And that would be tremendously appreciated. And then it'll also help us afford better equipment and get to do more exciting things with streaming and such. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will be back next week with a main podcast
About something.
about which I just realized I had not determined yet because I couldn't figure out a topic. We'll figure out a topic at some point. And then, as is tradition, this ending is disintegrating before our very eyes. So I will just say we will talk to you again soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Peace out. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
It helped that I hadn't played like 8 of them. Or at least in terms of time, but
That was great.
hour and a half.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you're still watching this, I greatly appreciate it. I hope you had an enjoyable time watching us talk about various exciting games. Maybe you heard about some games you hadn't heard of before and are going to check those out. I think all these games are great. And again, we'll be back in a couple of weeks to record the next installment of this. I will post it all on social media multiple times, so keep an eye out there and you won't miss it. Goodbye, everyone.